Well, thank you. I have to also say thank you to Peter. I think his presentation was really wonderful this morning, and it touches on things that I work with. So as a counsellor, I actually do sort of an eclectic mix of different things, and art therapy is one of the things that I do. And so I just thought you might find it helpful or interesting to know a little bit about art therapy, how it's used, and perhaps just a few little snippets about how it's actually worked for people. And it suits people of all ages, from children to teenagers to adults. So I guess my experience with using art therapy, I actually was for a time a welfare teacher in a primary school, and I was also an art teacher. And what I found was that during art, a lot of the children would actually talk about problems or things that they were struggling with. And sometimes their parents would come in at the end of the day and talk about different things. And so in a way, that was sort of the little seed that got me started on doing all sorts of studies, and eventually counselling studies and bereavement counselling, and further into couples counselling and all sorts of other aspects to do with counselling. So if I sort of go back again quickly to the primary school, after I'd actually done my art therapy studies, I was doing some voluntary work with teenagers at risk. So teenagers who were at risk of dropping out of school or had actually were reluctant to attend school. And I did some work in places like scout halls and little halls in sort of the local Gippsland community, and found that it was a hard slog because a lot of the kids didn't really want to be there, but they thought, well, it was preferable to being in school. And after a while, it's about building up relationships, and so it sort of meant that as they got to know me, and I certainly was not an authoritarian sort of person, I was actually trying to help them to express some things creatively, and I actually found that really rewarding work. Some other work that I did voluntarily was working with a cancer group for a while, and those people found that using art materials, perhaps painting, drawing, and sometimes writing notes to do with what they had actually worked on, and also just being in a group and sort of a shared experience, that it was a really helpful thing. So has anyone ever used art therapy? Anyone in the room? Could you just... You have? Okay. I'm interested later, maybe we can have a chat about how you found it. So we might just start. I have to tell you, I have never done a PowerPoint presentation before. So this probably looks really, really amateurish, and I'll sort of apologise for that. But I've also tried to make it a little bit colourful so that it might at least get your interest, and it might be something that you think about sometime that you might like to do. It fits in really nicely with what Peter was talking about being in the moment. Because when you're actually doing something with the art materials, you're really focused on what you're doing, and you're not so much thinking about other things, or whether it's, you know, sort of bodily responses, thoughts, all sorts of problems. And so I actually think it's a really wonderful thing that can be used with people. So let's get started, and we'll go to the next slide. So I've sort of written a bit for you to read, and I'll try and talk a little bit to some of the slides. So it involves the use of art materials. You might use paint or pencils, You might actually use pastels, all sorts of things. And it's about exploring your thinking and your feeling. And you're probably going to say, well, how can that be? And I'll try and get to explaining that a bit along the way too. So, as with my counselling, I believe in working in a person-centred way. That means I work with the issues that the person brings into the room, and that they're their issues. So even though I've got a whole lot of theory and practice, I don't actually work with how I think things should be. So it's really trying to draw from the person their own thoughts and values and what's important and how they want to work. And in counselling, I actually check in with the clients, is this what you're looking for? What is it that you're wanting to attend to? So I sort of get that information, and then I'll start tailoring some activities to what the needs are. Sometimes, I might work in a group, but we'll get to that shortly. So art therapy is connected to understanding yourself. It involves really a search for meaning, and it can help with personal growth, self-empowerment and healing. In art therapy, usually a client or a group of people will work with a therapist. It does seem to work best when you're sort of accompanied or together. Just like you are now, you often find that, shared experience somehow or other has a healing aspect to it as well. And, I think Joy was saying how lovely it is to be with all you people, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, Joy, and that how you don't have to explain yourself. You just sort of, you have some similar experiences, some different experiences, and it just is a state of being that's really nice. And that's what can happen in an art therapy group, where a therapist is mindful of everyone in the group and their issues, and perhaps tailors or presents some activities that everyone can participate in their own way. So not everyone's going to do things in the same way or at the same level, and sometimes I find, or have found, people have come along to my groups and they'll sort of say, oh, I can't draw, or I'm not an artist. You don't have to be. Oh, I haven't drawn since I was a small child. That's okay, because we start off with activities so you get familiar with materials, and usually it's not long before people start really responding to making lines and shapes and using paint or pastels, and they overcome those fears and really focus on enjoyment of what they're doing. And the additional thing that comes in there is really the power of colour. I think that colour can be a very healing thing as well. So you've sort of got a combination of lots of things. It's actually a way of communicating without words. If you're in a spot where you can't find words, or you might not even want to talk about something, but you can start sort of drawing and making marks on paper, and then after a while what usually happens is people do find words for the artwork that they've come up with. Now, ideally, I would have liked to have had all of you doing something, but that's not possible in today's situation. So you just have to listen to me and sort of believe what I'm saying. I'm sorry. Okay, next, please. Now, if we look back, human beings have actually been creative for so long. If we go back to the times of the caveman, and perhaps people were huddled in some cave, frightened because there might have been marauding animals sort of circling them, or they might have been really, really starving. They needed food, and they needed to be able to communicate with their clan or their group on what they were going to do to be able to get some food. And so they actually often started depicting things on cave walls, and many of those were actual drawings. And this is actually from, I don't know that I'll say it correctly, but I think it's Lascaux Caves in France, one of the oldest caves that have been discovered. And last year, when I went to India, I went to some caves that were up in the mountains, and it was quite a trek. It was really, really hard slog up a great long walk that was getting steeper and steeper and steeper. And the cave pictures there were actually carved, and I think that's the only known place where they were carved, and there's all sorts of symbols. And I have included one of my photographs. It doesn't look very good, but it will give you an idea, and I can't remember if that's next. Yes, it is. So, and if we have a look, yes, that was discovered by, I think he was actually a Scottish policeman working in that Kerala district of India, in southern India. His name was Fred Fawcett, and as I said, these caves are really rare, and to date they seem to be the only caves where the symbols have been carved into the rock. And so that's sort of, when you sort of enter into the area, they're just surrounding you, all these sort of engraved pictures, which are amazing. So where I was going with that is, in a way, we've always wanted to create symbols. We've always wanted to express ourselves in different ways. And it's not so much about what the symbols look like, but just that we actually make these symbols, and that we often tell a story. The story we might want to... Oh, sorry. Keep my hands down. The story we might want to keep to ourselves, and that's okay. And the beauty of art therapy and images, that we create, we know what they mean, and not everyone else does. And there might be things that you don't want other people to know. They might look at what you've created and think, oh, wow, that looks really interesting. And some people might ask, what's it about? And it's up to you whether you just give a little nutshell or make up a little story of your own, or whether you, as in perhaps with a therapist, might want to explore what it really is about and talk about. And a lot of people actually get peace and healing through that, eventually being able to talk about some of the things that they have struggled with. So, like, what's the difference between art therapy and art? I actually think they're intertwined, and I think I've got a slide further on where really with art classes you would be probably looking at something and trying to make a depiction of that in some way, whether it's realistic or abstract. Whereas with art therapy, you're going into your inner thinking, your inner thoughts, and that's where your inspiration, you're going into your subconscious and you're expressing yourself. So that's sort of a difference. But some people who do art therapy end up, some of their work tends to be really great at artwork, and vice versa. Some artists, when they're actually doing their artwork becomes healing for them. And I sort of think about, you may have heard of Frida Kahlo, a Mexican artist who at a very young age was had an accident in the street that left her unable to walk for the rest of her life, and had really restricted movement. And she was a painter, and she kept on painting. She would have often her bed set up where she'd be lying down, and then she'd have family members or others who were helping her to organise the canvases so that she could be applying the paint. most incredible paintwork, finest brush strokes, and artwork that will really challenge you at times when you look at it, but it's amazing. And then I think the other extreme, and I've got an example further on, where I think it was Henri Matisse, when he was in his 90s, was really ill and spent quite a long time in hospital. And he started doing paper cutouts and torn paper work. And that work is really amazing. It's interesting to look at, but I would suggest that it was also healing for him doing this work at that time when he was struggling with his ill health. So art has in fact recorded history, and even though it's not showing there, I did write it. That's one of the first views of Melbourne, the city of Melbourne. So I thought you might be interested in that. Here it is, a tent, a river and land. And I couldn't find out who had done that. So apologies, and hopefully I'm not, sort of going to be in trouble with the copyright, but I actually did not have the name of the artist. I couldn't find it. So art has always incorporated ideas. It might be feelings, dreams and inspirations. And so the work here was an art therapy work by someone, I think an American person, and it's sort of a dreamlike state, and I'm not even going into interpreting what it could mean, but you might come up with some thinking for yourself. The work can convey a wide range of emotions, from joy to deep sorrow, triumph to trauma. And in actual fact, I think probably about 50 years ago, art therapy was first used with some of the people from the soldiers and from the war who were struggling with PTSD. And they found that that was actually a good way of helping them get through some of their difficulties. So even though it might sort of sound a bit like something new, art therapy has been around and has been used for a long time. It has been used by institutions, sometimes very successfully. Other people, individuals, and have set up their own businesses, and sometimes people work from hospitals and other places using art therapy with, I'll say clients, the hospitals would say patients. All right. And this is just, it's not my work, it's an image that was freely available on the internet, and I thought, a bit of colour, that we'll put that in there so that it gives you a break from just listening to me speaking. And in fact, I was sort of thinking on the way down, I had to travel by bus because the trains aren't working in Gippsland. And I was thinking about the colours of my day from when I left home. So there'd been heavy rain overnight and rain first thing this morning. And the sky was a mix of greys and blues, and there was sunshine. And then I saw the most incredible rainbow from the bus. So I thought, wow, that's pretty amazing. I've got this whole spectrum of beautiful colour that I actually find that colour really I seem to be energised by colour, and I think you might find that too if you gave it some thought. Right, okay. Art therapies evolved from the idea that art images can help us understand who we are, to express ideas and feelings that words cannot, and to enhance our lives. And so there I've acknowledged that's called Birth of Day, and I would sort of request that you try to refrain from thinking, what is that, and just sort of take in the colours, and that's really all that matters. Some more images from art therapy sessions. So this one seems to have quite a bit of movement in it, and colour, and a variety of colour. When I'm working with people, I actually don't interpret their work. I know some art therapists do, I don't. I actually talk with each person and ask them to tell me a bit about their work, to, you know, what do these colours mean that you've used? And sometimes I've been internally sort of slightly surprised, because I might ask people to choose a colour that you think's a happy colour for you. And it will be the opposite of what I would think is a happy colour. But that's okay. That's what they think. And that's what they've used. And sometimes, you know, young children, especially perhaps children at kindergarten, often start off with limited colour, and they tend to like to use black and white a bit, and then they might start using a splash of red or a splash of yellow. Art therapy is a bit like that too, because with the people that I have worked with, they might have a limited range of colours that they want to use, and then as they start sort of, in a sense, relaxing, freeing up, feeling a bit of relief from some of the conversations about their work or what's happening, what's motivated them to create this work, then they always start using more colour and more colour. So that's quite an interesting thing. Okay. Sometimes people have really, really strong emotional responses, and as a counsellor and practitioner, I really need to make sure that the person or persons I'm working with are safe and feel that they're in a safe space. And so, in a way, the art materials also help with that. They sort of help to contain really strong emotions. Sometimes when I have worked with clients just in counselling, I'm really taking notice of their body language and their physical responses. I do the same in art therapy. It just sort of, it's something that I've learnt to do over time, and it's really helpful, because I can usually see, but not always, I can usually see if someone's struggling in some way, and I'll just say, are you okay? Do you need a break, or do you need some help? What do you need? Sometimes people get so upset that they actually need to do what Peter was talking about before, and I'll do that in the room as well. So mindfulness, bringing them back into the moment, like, you know, where are you? What are you doing? What can you, and tuning into senses. What can you see? What can you smell? What can you hear? And that sort of starts, and the breathing, just breathing, breathe in deeply and slowly. There's a type of breathing that in counselling I try and get clients to do, and it really helps with anxiety. And I sort of say, don't get fixated on the numbers, that doesn't matter, but breathe in and you might count 4. Hold for 5 and breathe out for 7. All right? It doesn't matter if you do it 2, 3, as long as when you're breathing out, you're actually breathing out for longer than when you're breathing in. It really helps a person, I've tried it myself so I know, to start relaxing, especially if they're really, really anxious or struggling with anxiety. And clients have told me, wow, that really does work for me, that's really helped. That, you know, usually people will have several things that they do to help themselves at any one time. So if we come back to the here, children, teenagers or adults might use art materials to not only explore things like, we start off with a focus, so we don't get into deep, heavy, problematic things. We start off with the material, so you might be actually filling the page with lines. They might be straight, crooked, curvy, close together, far apart, crossing each other. using colour, light and dark. And in this way, after a while, enjoyment starts to kick in and you sort of forget about that, I don't know what to do or I can't do this or whatever. You're just actually starting to use the materials. And there's no right or wrong. So everything's okay. What someone next to you is doing is their thing. And you don't have to compare yourself. And when I'm working, I try really to be encouraging for everyone. We all like a little bit of praise at times. We all feel good from that. And so I think praising and appreciating can be a really valuable thing in art therapy, but in daily life. Okay, so here's some people getting into things, some finger painting, some stamping and potato clay printing, and just some other examples showing just a variety of colours and topics. The one, it's all right, just leave it. The one that was down the bottom with the ladder, there's actually quite a few artists who do artwork where they feature ladders in, and they'll have their own interpretations on what the ladder means. Okay. So sometimes collage is used. It might be coloured papers, cloth, cardboard cutouts and torn images. You know, it doesn't have to be all really neatly cut. And this is the artist I was talking about before, and this is depiction of a snail. And what I found, it actually can help you. Just say you might actually be sitting at a table or somewhere to work, and you might think, oh, I can't concentrate, I'm thinking of this, that and the other, and that's where also mindfulness can come in, you know, into the moment. But you don't know what you're wanting to do. If we start off with collage, I've had some amazing results with that were outstanding. People might just start cutting up magazines or tearing them. They might actually do something like a vision board where they might want to focus on an emotion or a mood or a dream or a goal, something that they might want to do in a few weeks' time or 6 months or 5 years, and just collecting pictures for that and then pasting them down with glue. And it's really amazing. And then they hold onto them. I had someone who, in one of my groups, who was actually putting together a whole lot of pictures, and it ended up she couldn't stop. She went home and she worked for about 4 days, and she said, I now know what I want to do with my life. And I was thinking, okay, what am I going to hear here? And she actually wanted to open a shop. She wanted to import things and sell particular things. And so she started developing a business plan, and she said it was all because of her thoughts had been really scattered. She didn't know what to do. She couldn't seem to organise herself. She didn't know where to start. From this, she then decided she needed to get a business plan and get some help. She needed financial advice. She needed to source where she was going to get her materials, and she went on and did all that. She actually did open a shop, and it was successful for a while, but she found it hard to keep on doing that with family commitments. So guess what? The smart lady converted it to actually sales on the internet. So she worked from home, and it was a whole lot easier, but ended up being a successful business. So I don't think I had much to do with it. I'm just trying to get across to you that it's amazing how art therapy can work in mysterious ways and really be quite helpful to people. Okay. Sometimes the therapist might decide to introduce the idea of the mandalas to the client, and Peter also mentioned this. And this is where a person will work within a circle using colour, lines and shapes in their own way. The idea of working within a circle is said to be really healing, and the circle is sort of representing completeness or wholeness. Sometimes art materials might be used on canvases, so think about what's your favourite colour or what are your favourite colours. If you were going to be in a group with me, I probably would start off with that. And it might be something you're not even conscious of or don't think about, or it might be something you think about a lot that's really important to you. And this is one of the, it doesn't look like it, but cut out collage works from Henri Matisse, so paper and art materials, and it's called The Sorrows of the King. Okay, art therapy used to be referred to as drawing from within. In most sessions, the focus is really on your inner experience. And yes, I thought that was a beautiful image, and there's so many things that I like about it, so I hope there's something appealing to you. You might actually look at it and think, I really dislike that, that's okay too, but I just thought that there's a lot of movement, there's beautiful shapes, there's interesting colours, and there's a focal point with what looks like light. And I need to tell you this, when I was coming down on the bus, I had a lady in front of me who was on her phone, and she was talking non-stop, and I was thinking, oh, this isn't what I need. And I thought, no, stop it, think differently. It might be okay. And it was, because there was this little snippet of conversation I was trying to tune out, but she was talking to someone, I think it may have been a son who was out of work, and she was sort of saying things to him, and she said, you know, we're all light. We're like the stars. The stars are light and gas and energy, and we're like the stars. And I just thought that was magic. I've never heard any person say anything like that, and I thought, oh, that was wonderful. So there, almost like there was a purpose for why I happened to sit behind this lady who was talking on her phone, and after a while she stopped anyway. So it fits in again with Peter's ideas of, you know, that maybe we challenge ourselves to think a little bit differently about some things. Okay, so this is an example of a mandala. Everything's related to everything else, and that little snippet that I just said, I think, sort of expresses that as well. So you've got a tree, you've got what looks like waves, fire, energy, stars, probably moon, so it's sort of like the whole universe within the circle. And what we know is that Carl Gustav Jung used mandalas himself for a long time when he was sort of trialling whether he would use these in his practice as a psychotherapist with his clients. And I think he might have actually done that for a couple of years. And he created a mandala every day and was sort of like doing research on himself. I've tried this, not for as long as him, but just for a few months, and found it really interesting too, where within the circle, without consciously thinking of anything, you just start putting colours and building up, whether you want to just fill it with colour or whether you want to come up with some symbols and shapes. And that's, he continued to use that work, art therapy sort of work in his psychotherapy with his clients. Sometimes we might use sculpture, dance, and writing could be used. Now, writing might be in the form of journaling, so something that I've struggled with when I started art class that Joy goes to, I think it was last year sometime. Alternate weeks we did journaling, and I've never really done journaling, and I found it really hard and struggled with the idea of writing a few things down. And then after a while I started slipping into this mode of I might gather some pictures or do little drawings and so forth. And what I've found is incredible. It actually sparks more creativity and has led to me creating some artworks that aren't art therapy but could be sort of if you get the gist of what I'm saying. So you might find that writing could be something really wonderful. I actually have got a poem that supposedly it's printed in a mandala book, hopefully I can find it, that I have at home, and it was written by a 10-year-old boy who had done some mandalas. I don't have an example of his work, but this is what he's written, and this might inspire you a little bit. Nature is beautiful and kind. She is always on my mind, but I'm afraid she's getting ill. She's suffering an oil spill. Her ozone layer comes to mind. It's getting very hard to find. She's got a fever, global warming in brackets. She's getting hotter every morning. She has congestion, acid rain. She says she has an ocean pain. She has pollution, non-biodegradables. Quite amazing use of words for a 10-year-old, and so it goes on. It's possible some adult has, edited or coached, but you might find that even just writing poetry is something that really appeals to you. You might not, it's okay. I'm just sort of putting out there some things that people might be able to use on their own, or you might even get involved with a group that does creative writing. Okay, the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new lands, but in seeing with new eyes. Art therapy is not for everyone and is not a cure-all. I just think it's incredible, but it's not a cure-all. It's just another way of problem solving, communicating and helping yourself to work with any issues or problems that you might have. It can actually help people to feel less alone because they think, well, in a way I'm communicating with my creativity, with whatever I'm doing, whether it is painting or drawing or sculpting or creative dance or music. It won't change what has happened, but it can help to identify your strengths and to help you manage yourself so that you can actually work through things, and so you can affect some change even if it's only a small amount. Okay. Next, please. To express emotions, we have to feel them. Colours can be used to express stored emotions. So, for example, think this is an activity that I have done with people. Choose colours that represent sensations you feel in your body. When I'm counselling adults and children, I'll often ask them, where did you feel that? They might say, like I feel really angry or I'm feeling really anxious. So where in your body did you feel that? And some people might say things from, well, in the gut, in the stomach, in the chest or the heart, and might be their hands start shaking or trembling. And so I actually say, use that as information, all that you're reading yourself. And it doesn't mean you have to go into full-blown being upset and distressed, but you might feel something happening in your body, and then you can say, okay, this is like I felt when such and such happened. Okay, this is a warning that I'm heading towards. I need to look after myself. I need to do something else. Okay, I'm feeling a bit shaky. I might need to sit down, or I might need to get help. And so in that way, if you can start noticing and locating that, it can be really, really helpful to you. And then if you can actually express that in some way on paper or elsewhere, often that can be, people tell me it feels freer, it actually feels a little bit easier. Doesn't change things as such, but it really helps with what's happening. Okay, colour meanings can guide thinking, but many people use colour instinctively, and that's really how I work too. I just love using colours as I sort of sense them or how I want to put them together, and I thought this was a beautiful image for you to look at. So people might often say things like, I have the blues, or we might comment, that person's red in the face, or she or he's green with envy, and we sort of know or have connotations with those sort of sayings. Okay, next please. So I haven't gone through all the colours. You can, if you're interested, you can Google and do some research if you're unsure. You don't have to know, but it's just interesting. So red, and there are lots more meanings with all these colours. I've just picked out a few words for the sake of the presentation. So red might show strong emotions such as love or anger, passion, drama. It's attention, grabbing. Orange we associate with excitement, warmth, enthusiasm, happiness, joy, and it can be really motivating. Yellow can mean optimism, sunshine, can be uplifting, and it might indicate success. And blue, often we think of blue as being really calming, but also that it shows trust, loyalty, intuition, wisdom, calmness. It represents the sky and the sea, and sometimes they say the throat chakra is sort of blue, and you can express yourself with words or in any way that you want. Okay. And this is an example of an activity that I might use in a group or individually. So it might be focus on an emotion you would like to explore. It can be one you're struggling with, or maybe one you'd like to cultivate, such as playfulness or joy. And sometimes, when we're feeling really, really horrible and don't feel joyous, it can be really good to do an activity like this. Now, it doesn't mean at the end of the activity you're going to feel deliriously happy, but you might, or will usually find that your spirits are uplifted a little. Okay. With your non-dominant hand, so I usually use my right hand, so I've started trying to use my left hand a bit more, and that's my non-dominant hand. Draw a picture of a character who personifies this emotion. So say we pick playfulness. Hopefully you're getting some visual things happening with your mind. You may not, but this might be a little germ of a seed to start you off. You can create this character. You might use collage, magazines, coloured paper, cardboard. And so then after that's done, I might ask some questions or get you to ask questions of what you've created, like what is your name? So you can then come up with a name for the person that you've created. Can you tell me about yourself? And you might even write a little bit about it. So you might make up this story. How do you feel? Is there anything you want from me? And that might be a message from you to yourself. Okay. So drama, movement and dance are also used in arts therapies, and a lot of people like those. That's not been my style. When I did my art therapy training, I actually went it was La Trobe University had a course of training, and that was mainly using dance and movement, and I just thought, no, that's not the way, that's not for me, but for some people it would be, so I didn't do that. And this is just some images or symbols that people might draw, and I had entertained thoughts of getting you all to do some symbols on paper, but I've only got tiny little bits of paper. If you're interested, I'll put it out, and there's some textures, and if you want to do just a symbol or something, and then that could be put together and may be given to Colleen and Joy if anyone wants to do that. So no pressure, that's totally your choice, but you might like to come up with something. And this is just an example of a Buddhist monk creating a sand mandala. And the amazing thing with those, I don't know if you've ever seen them making them, they are so incredibly detailed and take so long to do, and then when it's finished and they have their ceremony and ritual, they destroy it. And that really challenges your thinking, like, you know, we want to do stuff and we want to keep it and leave our mark. It's quite amazing. So that's all I'm talking about for today. So are there any questions? You don't have to have any, but if you have, I'll try to answer. So no one seems to have questions, but I'm hoping that that might give you just an idea of something else you might consider using. If you're interested, if you can locate an art therapist or someone who works in this way. And there are plenty around. If you live in the city, you may not find so many, but there definitely are people in rural areas as well. So thank you.